The decision to fight for one's country is deeply personal. Elvis Presley decided to fulfill his draft obligation in 1958, serving for a year and a half overseas in Germany. The self-proclaimed king had already hit it big, with Heartbreak Hotel reaching #1 on the charts 2 years earlier. Muhammad Ali, on the other hand, refused to serve his nation during the Vietnam War. Speaking out against the ever-escalating conflict in Southeast Asia, the self-proclaimed world's greatest used his celebrity platform to speak positively about his religious beliefs, as well as the fact that the Vietnamese weren't among those who regularly slung racist slurs in his direction. Ali's refusal to serve resulted in the loss of his freedom as well as his title belt. Still, I can fully respect the fact that both he and Elvis faced the music and didn't run off into Canada in order to dodge their official responsibility as citizens. War isn't for everyone. As a recording artist with a flair for dramatic costuming, Elvis didn't seem particularly cut out for the military. By all accounts, however, he served with honor, stating that the main motivating factor for him performing at such a high level was that everyone expected him to mess up. One might argue that if Elvis could do it, then anyone can. But the U.S. Air Force provides an even greater example for individuals who are willing to aim high in the form of Bob Ross. That's right, the poofy-haired artist known for painting happy little trees on his short-lived PBS series The Joy of Painting served with honor for 20 years in the U.S. Air Force. Most of his time was spent stationed in Alaska, where the young man fell in love with the majestic scenery. It was the non-profit United Service Organization that provided Ross his first painting class. He would quickly churn out pictures during lunch, developing a style of work that was conducive to the half-hour time slot that he would later claim as his own. Eventually, he realized that the paintings that he sold were bringing in more money than his monthly paycheck from Uncle Sam, and the rest became history. Although his show ended in 1994, Ross has recently seen a revival, resulting in a movie about his life, a re-release of the PBS show, and a lucrative series of merchandise bearing his likeness. Still, it remains odd to think of the calm, mild-mannered Bob Ross serving as a drill sergeant. But he isn't the only artist that was willing to serve his country during its time of need. Leonardo da Vinci, perhaps the greatest artist of all time, fancied himself as a military man, as he transitioned from Florence to Milan. The man from Venice was looking for a new start after having earned a reputation for being unable to fulfill the contracts he had agreed to. Armed with a musical instrument of his own design, he trekked 180 miles northwest to a city-state beneath the control of Duke Ludovico. His introductory letter included the promise that Leonardo would deliver to Milan indestructible bridges, cannons and artillery of beautiful designs, and unassailable armored chariots. In the postscript, Leonardo threw in that he was also pretty good at sculpting marble. You're listening to Empires, Anarchy, and Other Notable Moments, a podcast designed for deep dives that assist in the teaching of history. This series focuses upon the original Renaissance man, Leonardo da Vinci. Episode number 2, The Pageantry of War. Da Vinci wasn't fleeing from Florence per se, as his inclusion in the traveling party for Milan was a part of an intricate diplomatic strategy of the all-powerful Medici family. The bankers, which ruled Florence from behind the scenes, had enlisted Da Vinci's help in wooing the leaders of Milan in 1482. Historian Walter Isaacson writes that Leonardo's services were a diplomatic gift. Lorenzo de' Medici, eager to navigate the swirling rivalries and alliances among the Italian city-states, saw Florence's artistic culture as a source of influence. Botticelli and some of his other favorite artists went to Rome to please the Pope. Verrocchio, Leonardo's old master, and others to Venice. The 1482 delegation was headed by Bernardo Russella, a wealthy banker, artist patron, and philosophy enthusiast, who introduced the term balance of power to describe the continuous conflicts and shifting alliances involving Florence, Milan, and other Italian city-states, plus a pride of popes, French kings, and Holy Roman emperors. Reading between the lines, this meant that at 30 years old, Leonardo da Vinci of Florence was good enough of an artist to wow another lord, but not essential to the Medici's own needs. In sports terms, he would have been a tweener, meaning that he was somewhere between too good to stay an amateur, but not quite good enough for the pros. The city of Milan wasn't a backwater boondocks. It had a population that was 3 times the size of Florence and was ruled by hereditary dukes who had enhanced their power via militaristic achievements. The current leader, Ludovico Sforza, was known as the Moor for his dark skin. His last name was the result of a propaganda twist, as it meant steadfast. The family had previously served as mercenaries, ones that had gained a reputation for switching sides whenever it profited them to do so. In order to shift the perception of their unreliability, the family referred to themselves as steadfast in all their dealings. Ludovico's ascension to power suggests that the family didn't fall for their own propaganda. Historian Jonathan Spangler recounts the Duke's rise for us, explaining that Galazzo Maria's tyrannical rule became too much for his senior courtiers, who murdered him in church the day after Christmas in 1476. He was succeeded by his 7-year-old son, who was at first governed by his mother until she was run out by the boy's uncle Ludovico. The boy remained as his uncle's prisoner until the child's mysterious death, the 2 suspected causes of which are poison, or perhaps too many passionate nights with his new wife, who happened to be the captive's first cousin. Ludovico then sealed his usurpation of the throne by marrying his daughter off to Maximilian I, the Holy Roman Emperor. This might not have been the type of man that Leonardo had hoped to serve, but sometimes we're willing to put up with a bad boss if the rest of our workplace setting fits us. And Milan was just right for Da Vinci, as Isaacson describes Ludovico's Milan by writing that their castles were filled with courtiers, artists, performers, musicians, huntmasters, statecrafters, animal trainers, engineers, and any other helpers or ornaments who could burnish their prestige and legitimacy. In other words, Milan's castle provided a perfect environment for Leonardo, who had a fondness for strong leaders, loved the diversity of talent they attracted, and aspired to be on a comfortable retainer. It also helped that per capita, there was far less master artists than he had competed with in Florence. The Duke, hoping to paper over his violent usurpation of the throne, spent lavishly on cultural works, paying 140,000 ducats in order to refurbish the rooms of his palace. For comparison's sake, the annual salary of a high-level government official was a mere 150 ducats. That means that the refurbishment cost the equivalent of a yearly salary of 933 employees. Perhaps misunderstanding the Duke's nature, Leonardo didn't mention his ability to paint at all in his introductory letter to the Moor. Although he talked a huge game, Isaacson tells us that the artist's boasts were aspirational. He had never been to a battle, nor actually built any of the weapons he described. All he had produced thus far were some elegant sketches of concepts for weapons, many of them more fanciful than practical. Fancy is the correct term, for Leonardo, ever the perfectionist, drew his weapons of war with the precision of a master artist. My absolute favorite is his scythe chariot, which the History Channel's reinventors attempted to build in the early 2000s. There were two versions of a device which resembles a lawnmower straight out of a horror movie. In Da Vinci's designs, the horse can either be stationed in the center of the contraption or in front of it. As they propel the device forward, the device's gears would spin 4 wicked blades. In addition to etching fear within the eyes of the trapped horses, Leonardo's rendering includes a handful of happy little corpses, courtesy of a device that emerged from the darkest recesses of his brilliant mind. 500 years before the invention of the armored car, Da Vinci had deduced that it would grant his side a significant advantage if he could break the enemy lines. In addition to the scythe chariot, which would have sliced through a thin row of infantry, Leonardo designed the world's first tank. His armored cart resembles a 1960s-style UFO. 8 men would sit within the device in order to steer, propel, and fire the cannons that ringed the device. This was the unassailable armored chariot that he had promised the Duke. It was carefully designed on paper, including metal plates slanted at an angle that would allow it to deflect any weapon thrown at it. Unlike the chariot, however, modern engineering wasn't able to get Da Vinci's tank to move, as its gears had been drawn in such a way that resulted in the front wheels and back wheels turning simultaneously in different directions. The mistake is so simple that Da Vinci defenders insist that it must have been on purpose, in case his design fell into the wrong hands. Even if that's the case, many experts believe that the sheer weight of the device would have sunk into any ground that had been softened by rain. Like many of the genius's ideas, his tank wasn't yet possible with the technology of his time. Gunpowder was regularly in use by this point, and he designed a number of devices, including what some refer to as the 33-barreled organ of death. It was the precursor to the machine gun. Its triple rows of 11 cannons could all be aimed at the same time, wiping out an entire battalion as it charged. It was designed so that while one set of cannons was firing, another would be cooling, while the third set was being reloaded. He applied similar logic to a crossbow, supersizing it after performing experiments to realize that a 45-degree angle would deliver twice the force of a projectile at 90 degrees. These ideas weren't just pulled from the ethers. Da Vinci purchased a number of books regarding historical weapons of war, tweaking them based upon his own scientific observations. Roger Bacon, one of the leaders of the scientific revolution, had, for instance, listed ideas for weapons which would be able to move without animal power, submarines, and flight. In addition to the fanciful, nightmare-infused weaponry, Leonardo contributed high-end scientific thinking to the project. He was the first in the world to scientifically measure the penetration of the cannonballs, measuring angles as well as how the altitude affects the distance of the projectile. He worked on a steam cannon as well as a drill that was quite advanced for its time, one which Da Vinci claimed would allow the Duke to tunnel without making a sound right beneath the feet of his enemies. He only held back one thing from the Duke: a design for a scuba suit which would allow the user to breathe underwater via what was essentially a really long straw. A cork diving bell would float on the surface, allowing the submerged soldiers to sabotage boats from below. The most fascinating thing about that device was the fact that Da Vinci included a pouch for the diver to pee in, despite the fact that they would be completely submerged beneath the water. There were less exciting suggestions as well, including an extension ladder, movable barricades, and a system of pulleys and levers which would allow defenders atop the wall to deploy a device that would push off the opposing forces' ladders in the midst of a siege. The American Society of Mechanical Engineers proclaims that devices like this make Da Vinci the first systems engineer, creating a new attitude about understanding how machines worked. The curators at the Boston Museum of Science tells us that he reasoned that by understanding how each separate part of the machine worked, he could modify them and combine them in different ways to improve existing machines or create inventions no one had ever seen before. Leonardo applied this to all things rather than just military devices, designing his own clock, air conditioner, and hydraulic power saw. In 1495, he incorporated his findings to design a self-propelled cart. It is considered to be the first robot ever imagined. Art Publica magazine tells us that it operated via wound-up springs and functioned similarly to a clock, and its steering could be programmed via pegs inserted into round holes. These pegs helped guide the cart by making the wheels move at specific times. Constructed out of 5 different types of wood, the cart was 5.5 feet long and nearly 5 feet wide, and could theoretically move over 40 yards before needing to be rewound. Engineers made working replicas in 2004 and 2009. Both were successful. That last bit almost doesn't need to be said, as Da Vinci's name is almost synonymous with success. Yet it takes quite a bit of faith in a man from the 15th century to jump off of a cliff with one of his parachute prototypes. That particular design escaped from the artist's thoughts and onto the pages of his notebook in 1483. It called for a sealed linen cloth held open by a pyramid of wooden poles about 7 meters long. Da Vinci wrote in the margin that if a man is provided with a length of gummed linen cloth with a length of 12 yards on each side and 12 yards high, he can jump from any great height whatsoever without injury. It was quite a boast, considering that he relied only upon theoretical math for that conclusion. It was an even larger boast when we remember that he received virtually no education. 500 years later, Adrian Nicholas jumped 10,000 feet from a hot air balloon with the device. Numerous experts had informed him that he was about to commit suicide, as a canvas and wood contraption wouldn't fly because of their weight. Nicholas, of course, survived the fall, with the early version of the parachute performing its duty perfectly. It wasn't the only time that the Florentine played with the concepts of flight, as Leonardo is also credited with designing the first helicopter. The ornithopter, as it became known, however, isn't one of the ideas which worked. The pilot was meant to lie down in the center of the invention on a board. They would power the wings by pedaling a crank connected to a rod and pulley system, while utilizing a hand crank for increased energy output and steering the device with their head. The logic is sound, but there just isn't any way that one person would ever be able to generate enough power in order to get the device off of the ground. It's sad that this particular invention was among the few that proved to be impossible, as Leonardo was obsessed with flight. He believed that his infatuation originated in a dream of a hawk visiting his cradle, a fact that Freud overanalyzed. He remained hyper-focused upon birds for long periods of time across 2 decades. Isaacson notes that Leonardo investigated with an unusual degree of diligence the flight of birds and the possibility of designing machines that would enable humans to fly. He produced more than 500 drawings and 35,000 words scattered over a dozen notebooks on these topics. That is far more thought than I've ever put towards Earth's surviving dinosaurs. My students share a laugh at my expense whenever I reveal to them that the single hardest course that I took in college was bird watching. I was required to take just one science course across my 4 years as an undergrad. Rather than something complex like biochemical engineering, I elected for what seemed like the easiest option, hence birdwatching. What I didn't realize at the time was that anyone willing to teach a 300-level course really likes the subject. I assumed that I just needed to be able to spot the difference between a blue jay and a red bird. Little did I know that there are more than 300 different types of pigeons. In 4 years, it was the only class that I attended a final exam review session. If you think that's bad, realize that my roommate took and failed gardening during that same semester as his science course. Metals magazine points out to us that Confucius said that everything has beauty, but not everyone sees it. Leonardo da Vinci not only saw it, he embraced it, took inspiration from it, and went on to establish himself as one of the greatest painters ever to have lived and one of the most talented and ingenious thinkers the world has ever known. He had the deepest respect for nature and for life, and it was his bio-inspired approach to innovation that sowed the seeds for the first ideas of flying machines, artificial wings, submarines, and a raft of other inventions. Biomimicry is a discipline that approaches innovation seeking sustainable solutions to human challenges by emulating nature's time-tested patterns and strategies. Da Vinci didn't just watch birds. He scientifically measured the speed of their wing flaps, noting that they move their wings more swiftly when they lower them than when they raise them. He compiled so much data that he announced his intention to write a codex on the flight of birds. His outline suggests that he was ready to explore the concepts of gravity and density in great depth. But like so much of his artwork, the book was neither written nor published. Leonardo left behind a clue in his notebooks as to why he was unable to complete his work, or any of his other planned scientific codexes, telling us that to truly explain the science of the flight of birds, it is necessary to explain the science of the winds, which we shall prove by the motion of the waters. The understanding of this science of water will serve as a ladder to arrive at the knowledge of things flying in the air. Rather than narrowing his thoughts, Leonardo continually expanded his workload in order to arrive at what he hoped to be the final answer. This behavior is unique, even for a genius, as Einstein would regularly publish theories which he freely admitted might be incomplete. For a perfectionist like Da Vinci, releasing an incomplete idea was tantamount to admitting defeat, a concession he couldn't bear to make. His love of nature resulted in him consciously deciding to become a vegetarian, but like the Catholic Church, he had some odd exclusions. The Church today claims that fish aren't meat, while beavers and muskrats weren't off the Lenten menu during the Middle Ages. Da Vinci, the vegetarian, regularly partook in eating eels. He enjoyed eating them so much that he painted them garnished with an orange on the table of the Last Supper. Leonardo chose his diet on the basis of morality, writing that, "From an early age I abjured the use of meat, and the time will come when men such as I will look upon the murder of animals as they now look upon the murder of men." Interestingly, his Milan military design suggested that he could be okay with the murder of men under the right circumstances. Although some have argued that Leonardo's tank was designed in part to supplant the tendency to utilize war elephants, proving that of the two, he was more okay with men killing each other if it meant that the beasts were spared. His love of animals resulted in him regularly purchasing caged birds, only to immediately set them free of their cages. I wouldn't try to steer anyone away from a vegetarian diet, but like all dietary choices, there are pros and cons, particularly in an era that was devoid of nutritional supplements. The National Library of Medicine has published studies which suggest that Da Vinci's diet likely contributed to the stroke that ended his life. Melissa Breyer writes for the website Tree Hugger. She made 3 of Da Vinci's favorite recipes. The first one that she tried was fried figs and beans. She was left wondering, why isn't figs and beans more of a thing? Next up was almond pudding, something that he clearly enjoyed, as Da Vinci's recipe made enough to serve a group of 20. She tells us that when warm, it had a kind of porridge vibe that was okay. But after sitting in the fridge for a few hours, a luxury that wasn't available in the 15th century, it was really pretty good. It set beautifully and was surprisingly, however, quite creamy. After finishing up with some dressed greens, she reveals that her body felt nourished, her spirit felt pleased, and for some reason, all of a sudden, she wanted to start dabbling in cartography, paleontology, and ethnography. While his recipes appear to work quite well, he was never able to unlock flight. But there is a chance that that wasn't the rare failure for the genius. Some suggest that his helicopter wasn't ever designed for the battlefield, as it was merely intended as a theater prop. Although Da Vinci had sold himself as a military engineer to one of the cruelest rulers on the Italian peninsula, his services weren't needed. Ludovico managed to avoid a confrontation until 1499, 17 years after the artist's arrival, upon which time neither the Duke nor his top engineer lived up to their lofty reputations. The Duke fled in the face of the French invasion forces, while Leonardo proceeded to give the invaders a tour of the Last Supper and other notable works that he had created for the city. It was Da Vinci's flair for theater that enabled him to make a name for himself in Milan. Keep in mind that entertainment options in the 15th century were far more limited than they are today. Scarcity of options meant that anything in the theatrical world was considered prestigious, with historian Thomas Palin revealing that the people of Florence regularly utilized the word genius to describe scenographers. Duke Ludovico funded grand pageants in part to amuse and distract the masses, offering them brief reprieves from the grim realities of life under his autocratic reign. Da Vinci directed a number of known performances, bringing them to life in ways that audiences wouldn't have ever expected through the use of automated props and scenery changes. Isaacson notes that the interplay of fantasy and machinery was something he was born to choreograph. Because of his ability as an engineer, Leonardo was only limited by his own imagination. In 1496, he designed one scene that portrayed a god sitting amongst flames, another descending from the heavens, and a third scene during which the audience witnessed a god transforming into a mortal while shrouded in a cloud of gold dust. When stars were called for, he lit enough lamps to make it appear as though the heavens had chosen to at that moment bless Milan with a glimpse of its infinite cosmic wonders. For another performance, he created 2 semicircular amphitheaters that could be swung open and rotated so that they would go from facing each other to back. He was hands-on regarding everything. Historian Daniel Dellis Hill tells us that as master of festivities, Leonardo developed, organized, and directed productions for festival pageants, triumphal processions, mass, jousting tournaments, and plays, for which he choreographed performances, engineered and decorated stage sets and props, and even designed costumes. His helicopter, or ornithopter as he referred to it, makes a ton of sense if one assumes that it is piloted across the stage while safely tied to the rafters. The artist's journals also provide us with scattered notes, which show off a prototype for a robotic knight. The suit would have been filled with gears and wheels to make it appear as though it were truly alive. The fragments that we have regarding the creation suggest that it was fully capable of independent motion, sitting down, standing up, moving its head, and lifting its visor. An audience willing to suspend their disbelief lies at the heart of theater. Audiences allow themselves to be taken to a place where they actually believe that a helicopter is descending upon the stage in Miss Saigon. They believe that Elphaba truly is defying gravity while she's flying across the stage. The truly magical productions take us to an extraordinary place without being obvious about how they got us there. The Broadway production of Harry Potter and the Cursed Child makes the magic real for young and old alike, as their cloaks appear seemingly out of nowhere, characters teleport through phone booths, and polyjuice potions instantly transform characters before the audience's very eyes. Although the technical know-how has improved, Da Vinci's contribution to the theater arts would have been on par with the greatest showmans of the modern age. The stage was the one place where he could combine all of his loves. National Geographic explains that it was from theater that Da Vinci learned how to do tricks with perspective, because the stage in a theater recedes faster and looks deeper than it is. Even a table on stage would be tilted slightly so you can see it, which is also what we see in The Last Supper. Likewise, on the stage, the theatrical gestures of the characters would be exaggerated, which is what you also see in The Last Supper. His theatrical production led him to mechanical props like flying machines and a helicopter screw, which were designed to bring angels down from the rafters in some of the performances. Leonardo then blurred the line between fantasy and reality when he went on to try to create real flying machines that were engineering marvels. The remarkable thing about the stage, however, was that it forced Leonardo to actually finish something. One can't just proclaim that the work is unfinished when it is time for curtain call. Isaacson writes that unlike paintings, performances had real deadlines. They had to be ready when the curtains parted. He could not cling to them and seek to perfect them indefinitely. Perhaps this is why he remained involved in pageantry, but never chose to make it his main medium. While musicals weren't a thing until the 19th century, and operas trace their beginnings back to the 17th century, it is entirely plausible that Da Vinci involved music within the shows that he staged. As with everything else that he touched, Leonardo was a gifted musician. Texts from the time suggest that he was able to play with rare distinction. His favorite instrument was one of his own ingenious design, a lyre that was held like a fiddle with 5 strings that were played like a bow and another 2 that were designed to be plucked. He also engineered an early version of a keyboard, added hammers and dampers to bells connected to levers. In addition to producing innovative sounds, the man from Vinci added flair to his creations, designing violins that had carved skulls and feathers built into the instrument. As was true of his other pursuits, a number of his ideas seem to have been plucked from the future. Isaacson tells us that the most complex of Leonardo's instruments was the viola organista, a cross between a violin and an organ. Like a violin, its sound was produced by moving a bow back and forth across some strings. But in this case, the bow was moved mechanically. Like an organ, it was played by pressing keys on a keyboard to determine which notes should be produced. The viola organista was a brilliant idea that attempted to combine, in a way that is still not done today, the multitude of notes and chords that a keyboard can produce with the timbre or tone color that comes from a stringed instrument. Emmanuel Winter-Neitz, a curator of musical instruments at the Met, sees brilliance in what Da Vinci was trying to accomplish. figuring out ways to play faster and increase the number of available tones and sounds. It, however, never fully functioned the way that he had intended, but failure was just part of the process, believing as Thomas Edison that rather than failing, he had just found 10,000 ways that it wouldn't work. Da Vinci was always pushing boundaries, which led to some hilarious results. Brian Sullivan, an engineer, describes for us what is known as Leonardo's kitchen nightmare, a rare instance where everything went to plan, only to produce disastrous results. The artist was brought in to assist the Duke's kitchen staff in planning for a particularly large dinner party. Acting as an external consultant, Leonardo dived right into a world that he knew little about. The situation was doomed to fail, as it might not be the best plan to ask an amateur vegetarian chef for help cooking your pork roast. After a period of assessment, Da Vinci created a series of conveyor belts in order to bring food to the cooks faster. He invented a larger oven designed to cook food at higher temperatures than normal, planned a sprinkler system in case that oversized oven exploded, and invited local artists to personally carve individual entrees into works of art for the guests to eat. Sullivan paints quite a picture for us, imploring us to imagine the unfolding scene in our own kitchen, writing that a designer comes over to help you cook dinner. He creates a conveyor belt in an already crowded kitchen. You have never seen or used the new oven that cooks faster than what you've been using for years. The designer installs a sprinkler system, which further crowds the kitchen. Finally, the designer invites 50 or so artists to build edible art for the guests. Your kitchen is super crowded. You feel impending doom at the chaos that has invaded your kitchen. The comedy of errors begins when the conveyor belts run too slow. With a quick adjustment by Leonardo, the belts run faster. Soon the food piles up. The belt needs another adjustment. Next, the new oven works as designed, but the cooks burn the food using this unfamiliar oven. Besides burning the food, the new oven causes a small fire. Naturally, the sprinkler system is used. The sprinklers work perfectly, but ruins most of the food. Finally, the artisans carving the food are too slow. The guests who were promised an extravagant dinner are now starving, most of whom go away hungry. The original Renaissance man, a term which confers that Da Vinci was capable of succeeding at a variety of different things, wasn't afraid to try new things. He owned a number of collections of Aesop's fables, inspiration for his own literary works that remained forever entombed within his notebooks. The majority of them reveal his keen love of nature and his belief that most creatures were the causes of their own misfortune. Fables are simple stories, such as The Tortoise and the Hare, intended to convey simple, one-directional morals. Da Vinci's literary attempts tended to be shorter than Aesop's and contained more puns than the Greek author. One of them goes like this: "No longer content with flying easily through the air, a vain and vagrant moth was overpowered by the enchanting flame of a candle and decided to fly into it. But this pleasant impulse proved the cause of sudden sadness, for its wings were consumed by the flame, and the wretched moth fell to the foot of the candlestick, burned all over. After much crying and contrition, it wiped the tears from its wet eyes, and lifting its face upward, said, 'O false light, how many others in the past you must have miserably deceived like me! And if I still wished to see the light, shouldn't I have distinguished the sun from the false glow of your dirty tallow?' Many of his stories contain doodles, suggesting that rather than a focused interest, his efforts as storytelling weren't all that serious. Many of them aren't ready to see the light of the day, such as one titled The Crab, which merely states that the crab hid beneath a rock to catch a fish that entered there, but floodwaters caused the rocks to collapse violently, and the crab was crushed between them. Still, one can imagine the court performer tucking his ideas away on the off chance that he would someday be called into action with a quick story, much in the same way that American President Ronald Reagan kept hundreds of note cards in his desk drawer, each filled with jokes that he might be able to use if the occasion merited it. I titled this episode The Pageantry of War because it covers Leonardo's first efforts at being a military engineer along with his career in the world of theater. I love the juxtaposition of the two, as men in the 21st century tend to imagine warfare as a masculine art, while simultaneously dismissing the theater to the feminine world, often assuming that nearly all men involved in the theatrical arts are gay. Sean Bennett wrote a guest editorial for the Onstage blog, informing us that you will be hard-pressed to find anyone who works in theater who hasn't heard the words, "theater is gay," at some point during their career. This hurtful stereotype has unfortunately stopped a number of young men from getting involved in what can be an amazing life-altering experience for fear of appearing feminine or queer. Bennett, however, reminds us that theater and the arts are neither masculine nor feminine, they just are. Artistic expression and creation demand, at least to some extent, open-mindedness and emotional intelligence. That results in a compassionate environment in which minorities like the queer community can flourish, often finding the theater to be their safe space. He also tells us that the other reason why theater is sometimes labeled as queer, most often by men, is that there are aspects of stagecraft that run contrary to entrenched ideas of masculinity. The problem of toxic masculinity is one that most people will be at least somewhat familiar with by now. There are a number of things which we men do in theater which some still find difficult to stomach due to long-held prejudice. The extensive use of makeup, for example, or the tendency for artistic men to be more emotional and compassionate. He reminds us that while these things are arguably either irrelevant or net positives, they do fly in the face of the emotionless, hard-as-nails, man's man persona that has so long plagued our popular culture and twisted our perception of what masculinity should be. Revealing that Leonardo da Vinci was, in all likelihood, gay is critical within a classroom setting because it provides a positive role model for students who are themselves internalizing their own feelings. Yet just throwing out the fact that he was gay can alter our internal perception of the original Renaissance man. We subconsciously fit him into what, in our own minds, it means to be gay. I personally find that our society uses the largest of brushes regarding the stereotypes of this community. The LGBTQIA+ community itself is massively divided upon the roles of masculinity and femininity, something that actor and playwright Harvey Fierstone revealed when he stated, "What do you need to do to prove how much self-loathing there is among gay men? Just pick up any newspaper that has personal ads in it and look at how many say, 'No femmes, straight acting, seeking same, in the closet, do not believe in the gay lifestyle.'" He finished his diatribe by asking, "Do you ever see an ad for a heterosexual saying, 'Please don't act straight'?" Not all queer men are into theater. Many are professional athletes, gym rats, and outdoorsmen. In 2023, psychology researcher Ben Gerard presented the first experimental study to demonstrate status costs for gay men who present with more feminine than masculine qualities across workplace hierarchies, which demonstrate implicit bias among gay men as a community. His results tell us that gay men prefer a more straight-acting gay man for high-status roles, potentially creating a gay glass ceiling in workplaces. This homophobic bias is putting pressure on feminine-presenting gay men to conform so they might be passable as a heterosexual man. What we need is an increase in authentic representation of empowered feminine-presenting gay men, especially in the media, in order to counter misinformed biases regarding their ability to lead. Girard finishes by arguing that there needs to be education and awareness within the community and in recruitment processes around the potential to be unconsciously influenced by these unfair biases. This society-enforced play acting for the gay and lesbian communities played out within the U.S. military beneath the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy initiated by President Bill Clinton and repealed by President Barack Obama in 2011. Under the policy, gay servicemen were forced to remain in the closet, keeping their internal feelings bottled up. Such a policy was necessary, it had been believed, in order to maintain internal cohesion between soldiers. Upon the law's repeal, the RAND Corporation think tank looked back at its own reporting in 1993, writing that new facts had conquered old taboos. It turns out that portion of military men and women who self-identify as gay matches that of the civilian population. The presence of openly gay men and women had no effect upon unit cohesion, as professionals can develop trust rapidly in intense performance situation. Cohesion in combat stems not from preconceived shared values and attitudes, but rather from the shared dedication to the mission. In the heat of combat, you don't care who the person next to you is sleeping with. You only care if they're capable of doing their job. The ultra-masculine worlds of the military and professional sports are the most important frontiers for gender representation, and the fight isn't close to over. President Donald Trump essentially reinstated the policy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell for transgender individuals in the military, forcing them to live a closeted life, fearful about losing their career, access to earned education benefits, and healthcare coverage if they make just one slip in front of the wrong person. If Girard is right, and there needs to be education and awareness around the glass ceiling related to gender roles within the gay community, then I would argue that Da Vinci ought to be their jumping-off point. Isaacson writes that rather than try to conform, Leonardo made a point of being different, dressing and carrying himself as a dandy. The historian then includes a passage describing the clothing which Leonardo brought with him from Milan to Florence, comparing the list to what must have seemed to have been a list of costumes from one of his stage performances. It included one gown made of taffeta, one velvet lining that can be used as a gown, one Arab burnous, one gown of dusty rose, one rose-colored Catalina gown, one cape of dark purple with a wide collar and velvet hood, one coat of dark purple satin, one coat of crimson stain, one pair of dark purple stockings, one pair of dusty rose stockings, one pink cap. Leonardo da Vinci's intense artistic flair didn't serve to exclude him from pursuing the masculine arts of warfare. Indeed, I have to say that there could be nothing more terrifying in ancient or modern warfare than seeing a scythe chariot charging full speed towards your boxed-in infantry line. And just in case there's someone still listening who says, but none of his ideas worked, an assistant in his workshop known as Jules the German returned to his homeland around 1499 with a prototype of Leonardo's idea for a metal wheel that was set spinning by a spring. As the spinning contraption scraped against a stone, it sparked enough heat to ignite the stored powder. This idea, created in the mind of a man who loved nothing more than to design a beautiful pageant, spread throughout Northern Europe, ushering in the era of guns. Da Vinci wasn't dismissed from military service, the scientific world, or from the courts of the most powerful Catholic men of his age because he dressed in an effeminate way or loved the pageantry of the theater. Instead, he was celebrated because of what he could contribute to each of those arenas. To paraphrase Bennett, Leonardo wasn't masculine or feminine. He wasn't straight or gay. He just was. Perhaps being aware of that fact might help someone out there in need of a role model for their life. Chart your own path while simultaneously knowing that geniuses have walked similar ones. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to interact with the show, you can email us at resourcesbylowry@gmail.com or find us on the platform formerly known as Twitter. If you would like to financially support the show, please look in the description for more information. As always, thank you for listening, rating the show, and spreading the word.